Hello and welcome to the IMD Podcast Network. Today, we're bringing you an episode of Mike and Amit Talk Tech. Our hosts are sitting down with healthcare expert Achim Plueckebaum to explore how generative AI is transforming medicine, drug discovery, and patient care. From groundbreaking innovations to ethical risks, Achim shares what the future of healthcare could look like.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to yet another podcast episode of Mike and Amit Talk Tech. Today, we are continuing our series where we invite people who guest authored articles in our book, Gain. And it's our pleasure today to invite Achim Plueckebaum. Achim is someone who has spent his life in healthcare, and he's here to talk about the impact of AI, especially GenAI, in that field. So, Achim, a very, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Pleasure.
Pleasure's ours. It's pleasure's ours. And we enjoyed your contribution because I think that life sciences is one of those areas that has the potential to be heavily impacted by AI and particularly generative AI. So maybe we could start there. What do you think will be or are the biggest impacts on life sciences from this technology?
I do agree with you. It will, and it has already, a large impact on life sciences. And actually, I think you can break it down into two big buckets. One is the innovation in medicine, and the other one is the impact on healthcare in general. Let me maybe break it down a bit more, because I suppose not everybody here is from the life sciences sector, and it's probably sometimes a little bit difficult to understand, because innovating in healthcare is a complex process. It's a very long process to get to medicine in general. And in particular, it takes a long time to cure a disease, as we know, because there's many uncured diseases still out there from what we know. And hence, targeting AI on such a broad field is a very difficult endeavor, but also offers a lot of opportunities. So in these two buckets that I mentioned, the first one, innovating in medicine, which is eventually creating new drugs or inventing new drugs, there's three areas that are really of interest for AI. One is the drug discovery itself. So giving an example, the AI-driven systems like Google AlphaFold 3 is definitely revolutionizing the way drug development is being done in predicting new molecular structures. The recent Nobel Prize winners have indicated that this is absolutely an area of scientific interest. And it shows also that using these kinds of tools, you can simply get faster in understanding all these molecular structures much better than before. Secondly, it's multimodal data interpretation. So AI can connect very diverse biological data sets like genomics, epigenetics, real-world data, so data that comes from us directly, to actually create a more holistic picture on our health or on our diseases. So a very impactful area, but just understanding the data sets much better than before. And then thirdly, in that bucket, it's about automating very complex processes. It normally takes about 15 years to bring a new medicine to the market, from the initial idea to the point it reaches the patient. So AI can definitely help to streamline these processes. It helps on the diagnostic side. It helps on the trial processes themselves, but it helps also to better identify the patients that are needed in order to test these new medicine on. Yeah? So there's a lot of stuff that's happening on that side, which is largely invisible to most of us. So on the more visible side, so on our side, the healthcare side, what AI certainly will do is helping us to become more predictive and preventive in our healthcare. So, for example, anticipating diseases before the symptoms even appear is clearly an area where AI can help, making it a more proactive than a reactive approach to healthcare. There is a super strong trend towards AI-enabled personalized healthcare. So tailoring the treatments based on the individual molecular and genetic profile will certainly become a standard practice in this area. And lastly, of course, the holy grail: can AI help decode human biology? So can AI potentially uncover hidden patterns in DNA, predict diseases, make responses better to medicine, and accelerate personalized medicine? So a large field, and I just gave you a couple of ideas now, which I also highlighted in your book chapter.
This is absolutely fascinating, Achim. Thank you so much for sharing this. My question to you is, do you have companies already working on this, or either some or all of this, or is this largely theoretical still, or experimental still? How do you see this?
No, it's very actually it's a very crowded field. You would be surprised if I showed you a map of the many startups that are existing, especially in these drug discovery field. You will find thousands of startups, but not only startups, also the larger pharmacos. They're very, very active in that field. There's a lot of partnerships happening between academia and then also life sciences companies. Again, the Nobel Prize winning companies were largely large tech companies that are using chemical or biological AI. So there is a ton of stuff happening. It's just now a race against the time. It's also a race of who has the best technology, who is fastest, and also who does it in a way that it's appropriate with the regulatory standards that apply in our industry. And that is, of course, a very tricky thing, which is why you still see a lot of pharmacos still very, very competitive in that field because it's not an easy market to crack.
I sometimes feel bad for the chemists and the physics, the people in the area of physics. They don't get a lot of attention, right? And there's one day a year when, when the Nobel Prize in chemistry and the Nobel Prize in physics get given out and they get to be in the spotlight. And what happened last year? Both of those went to AI researchers, basically. Anyway, could you talk a little bit about the difference between AI, traditional AI, rule-based AI, and generative AI? Because, we've been using pattern recognition and traditional AI for a long time in the life sciences, but generative AI brings something new, something different. So if you want to talk a little bit about that.
So it's very true. So the traditional AI or the classical machine learning, of course, has been around for a while. So has it been also in life sciences. Of course, you would apply, and you still do, apply the traditional rule-based AI in a more deterministic environment. So areas where I always call it the tabular data is more persistent and is more usable. And you find it quite a lot in our field, especially when you go into these very heavily regulated environments. There is a lot of data that comes in very structured format. And that's where the classical ML driven piece is still persisting. Now, of course, GenAI opened up a whole nother dimension, especially to the multi-dimensional, multimodal data sets, where you have to look into not only the classical structural, but actually the combination of different data sets, which makes it very interesting. And then, of course, also where isn't text and qualitative data also available? Yes, of course, it is also very available in these types of industries. Just think about, I know this is a bit of a stupid example, but back before even electronic data capture, when a filing of a drug was being shipped to the FDA, which is a regulatory body for approving a drug, it actually happened still a couple of years ago. That was shipped by a truck driving a few tons of paper in front of the FDA's door and saying, "Here you go. Can you please look at our filing?" Of course, these days it's all electronic, but now think of doing this with AI-enabled processes where you can just do this faster, because very often these filings, for example, are very repetitive and they just need the additional scientific evidence that was done on a specific trial, which you can automate now heavily. Yeah? And that's what I meant by automating these complex processes. For that part, GenAI is just fantastic. It comes with a downside. I'm sure we'll talk about the risk and the challenges soon, because the topic of bias and reliability is a really difficult topic in our industry.
Yeah, so the Gen AI can bring and analyze and manage unstructured data, which a lot of it in the life sciences is unstructured. But let's move on to that, the risk side. Where do we sit on that, and where do the risks sit in compared with the rewards, and how do we manage the balance between those two things?
I think the good news in our industry is a bit like the financial sector. It's heavily regulated, and by default, you're not allowed to do crazy stuff without having the proper controls in place. So, for example, the idea of the fully AI-enabled drug that has been created and invented by a machine and then will come at some point to the patient will never happen, because the regulation prevents that the steps to actually go through proper controlled trials and then having the trials being conducted properly, then having them filed and then tested against the regulatory frameworks, that doesn't go away even with AI. It may go faster or more different, and we will have more innovation coming, but it's just still the same process. So in that sense, the good news is, and I always say this also, we shouldn't be afraid that suddenly everything gets out of control. There's actually very good controls in place. Now, that said, of course, AI poses now new challenges to this industry and to us as patients as well, because the topic of reliability and bias is a very, very serious one. Because just assume that a typical AI model picks up historical data and now makes a prediction based on historical data, but the data may not be representative of actually what the future will be, then you get obviously the wrong answer to something where you need to be extremely, extremely targeted, extremely focused. So this topic of bias and hallucination is a very serious one, and the better the models will get, the more importance it will have in terms of adoption in the life sciences industry. Data privacy and security, super, super important. Healthcare data is probably one of the most sensitive data sets we can imagine, as we know for ourselves. So it's absolutely crucial to have the AI-driven insights also being captured in a very, very secure way and making sure that the misuse of data just won't happen. So there are then by default also some ethical concerns. What type of AI-generated insights will you gather? Will this be always on a data set that is representative of us as a human society, or will it also have its own direction just because of the data set that you are using? Then also from a patient side, are we ready to even consume these types of data? What if you get a medical recommendation, and I'm sure we all have tried, like we did with Google. What if you now try to get a medical examination or some test being done on a GenAI tool? Are we ready to understand the complexity of information that it will give back to you, especially for complex diseases? And the last one, which I found also, which I wanted to mention here, which I always found interesting, and I actually talked about this with an executive recently from our industry. And she said to me, AI can always predict molecular structures, but translating these predictions into real drugs, into the chemical synthesis of a drug, still remains a challenge, and is actually a very real challenge these days. When you talk about the famous weight loss drugs, for example, that are now flooding the market, these things have been designed partially, of course, also by using modern technologies like AI, but translating this into chemistry that at the end becomes a molecule that you can put into a drug substance is a really hard thing to do. And that's still a very physical process, no matter what you have in terms of AI.
So maybe, Achim, your last point already answered the question that I'm about to ask. I thought that one area that concerns me particularly is purposeful misuse of AI to create destructive molecules. But maybe what you're saying is it's not that easy to do this. Is that fair? Or
no, it's not, because at the end of the day, you always need something physical, because it needs to be put into your body in some shape or form. The information alone doesn't do anything. And that's what I meant also. It's still a very regulated process in itself to get to the moment that actually a pill comes out of the factory and it's been tested and approved. So that doesn't go away. And I think that's also a bit of the safety net that we have as human society. Now, of course, is if there's misuse, yeah, like in any kind of industry, if there's misuse of this information, or if suddenly people have access to information that they shouldn't have, that's the security part of it, then of course you create a dynamic which you didn't have before. But otherwise, in terms of the actual steps, that's not going to change.
You mentioned in your article a sentence that intrigued me, and the sentence is that the cell can become readable. What do you mean by that? What does it mean the cell can become readable?
So we call this synthetic biology. So it's actually, that's this decoding of the human body to the point that you understand what is happening in the cell. And that's where the origin of life, of course, comes from. And the better we understand the cell, the better, of course, we can influence also a certain direction of what the cell is supposed to do in the body. And there are attempts, and they're actually very good attempts to apply AI to this type of what is called cell programming. And that, of course, is a very powerful tool, again, to the good and to the bad. We have to be careful here, because the minute now you start interfering so intrinsically into the body, you can use this for the good, but you can also use it for the bad. I'm just going to say this. But this whole cell programming topic is one that is clearly on on the more long-range horizon, but it's not so far away anymore, given that these tools are getting better and better. And that's called then the AI-driven cell programming, that you may be able to create some synthetic life forms, or to the point of even saying you may have programmable cells for regenerative medicine. Yeah? And this is for all the people who want to extend life to the point of extending life that we can get 150 or 200 years old. God bless, it will never happen. But this is what some people are aiming for, this regenerative medicine, so that our cells don't become older, but actually you keep them refreshing all the time. And there are some ideas using AI to these types of synthetic biology.
But I guess, again, you have the same challenge you mentioned before. Even if the AI could be so sophisticated that it understands how cells communicate with other cells or internally, you still actually got to do the biology part of it.
Yes. And that's, again, not going to change. But of course, we are getting now closer and closer to the point of, can AI influence the way what is happening in our body, not only before we become sick, but actually to the point of preventing to become sick or preventing to become old. Yeah? And then it becomes, if I may say, ethically also a bit of a difficult discussion, because then you are interfering into what nature is all about. And then we are going away from healthcare as being a disease management ecosystem, but actually healthcare becoming a well-being instrument. And that is a very, very different discussion.
Last question from my end, Achim. I mean, it's very obvious to me that you're super optimistic, you're super positive about the impact of AI, especially Gen AI, in the pharmaceutical and healthcare sector. My question to you is, how soon do you think the person on the street, the layperson like me on the street, will start seeing day-to-day impacts of what you're talking about? I mean, I know you can say that we're already starting to see it with the obesity drugs, even with the COVID drugs, so to a certain extent. But on a more day-to-day basis, how soon do you think, or do you predict, we'll start seeing the impact of this?
I think we do see it already today. It is changing rapidly. Yes, of course, if I may say, when you're more in our sector, in our industry, you see it simply by how fast things are evolving. This famous AI designed or AI optimized drug. Will there be a drug that is completely synthetically created? We are pretty close to it. There's a few companies that are very, very close to it. So that one certainly before the end of the decade. You can now spin this a bit further if you accelerate this with quantum computing or whatever next tech revolution will there be, and you just merge these disciplines together like they always happen to merge. It will just create another dimension of acceleration in this world of medicine innovation. But I think more importantly, and that's also what I highlighted in the book and in the chapter, for me, what is the real revolution here is the impact for patients and what it can do for us as individuals. And this element of democratization of healthcare, that I think we can see already today. I know we are all playing around with ChatGPT and all these tools, but now just believe it, that everybody in the world has the same access to the same level of knowledge like never before. And it's not like where you were in the past putting your disease into Google and it gave you a lot of crap. This one is actually now going to a level where you can actually do something with that information. And again, a colleague, an executive in my network, she called it, you become the CEO of your health. And I think that's a very powerful statement. Because just imagine you now control suddenly what happens to you because you have access to that data, if it's available to you, of course. And we know that many governments and systems and insurances still keep hold of our own data. But you will become much more in control of your own situation. And that in itself, by the way, no matter where you are on the planet. And I think that in itself is a super powerful statement. The second thing that we see now happening is this whole agentic AI, autonomous AI. Now put this into your personal healthcare, and imagine you had an AI twin, not a digital twin, but actually an AI twin next to you, who can always give you advice and support you in your own journey. Now, not only disease journey, but actually well-being journey. And that part, I don't think is that far away anymore. So that I think is powerful. And that's my last statement here on this question, Amit, I think will also change the way we will interact with our physicians, with our GPs, in hospitals, because we will have a much more eye-to-eye conversation. And the doctor finally, hopefully, also will have more time again for a good patient relationship and not be burdened with all this administrative stuff, because that can be done by AI, but instead now have a doctor again spending time with us. And that part in itself makes me very, very positive about this next phase.
And that would be nice if it were to happen. I saw some data the other day, the average amount of time a physician spends with a patient, and it's ridiculous, like single digit, not minute.
Yes, because they have all this administrative stuff to do, and we all know these arguments. So, but again, it has to be used in that direction, and maybe a bit of a, I don't know if it's a closing remark already, but we do need to spend time as individuals on these technologies and understand it right. But also as a society, we need to understand how we want to control it in a way that is used for the good intent and not for the bad intent. And that conversation needs to happen somewhere. And you can't put this on politicians or some tech oligarchs. You actually have to have, as a society, a good understanding of what you want to do with those tools. And if you don't, it will just get out of control.
And maybe then my very last question, and it's a link to that, this idea of the humanistic approach. The old quote, and you put it in your article, do not ask what disease the person has, ask what person the disease has. And you put a twist on that, and maybe you could explain that to the listeners. Then AI twist says, do not ask what health outcomes the generative AI provides. Ask what patient the generative AI serves.
This whole construct of putting the patient, especially for our healthcare, in the middle of it, and not the tool around it. Yeah. So I don't want to live in a world where the tool determines what I can do. I want to live in a world where I can use the right tool for my health. And that, I think, is a very different spin than saying I'm being overruled now by some tool that knows more about me than I should. And I think that's what I meant a little bit by let's get control of the situation. Let's get control of these tools so that they use us and they serve us, so that at the end, we as patients, we as individuals live in a better world than before.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Achim. That was absolutely incredible. Quick deep dive into the impact that GenAI is having already and will continue to have on this crucial field of medicine, health, and pharmacology. Thank you very much for joining us on Mike and Amit Talk Tech. Thank you very much for writing that amazing chapter in our book, Achim. Folks, if you would like more information about this podcast or about IMD, please do visit imd.org. Thank you for tuning in.
That's all for this week. This podcast was proudly brought to you by the International Institute for Management Development in Lausanne. You can find out more at imd.org.